A 300-pound boy faces cruel bullying from classmates who mock his weight in front of the entire class, giving him numerous hurtful nicknames about his size. Later, when the bullies try to mess with his food and physically assault him, they discover something they never expected. He is actually a formidable MMA fighter. Marcus Walker hunched his shoulders as he shuffled down the crowded hallway of Westridge High School. At 15 years old and weighing over 300 pounds, he had become accustomed to the stares, the whispers, and the not-so-subtle pointing. His massive frame took up most of the corridor, forcing other students to press themselves against lockers as he passed. It was his third week at this new school, and already it had become a daily gauntlet of humiliation. Wide load coming through. The shout came from behind, followed by raucous laughter. Marcus didn't need to turn around to know it was Trent Holloway, the star quarterback and self-appointed king of Westridge High. Where Trent went, his two loyal subjects, Devin Mitchell and Connor Reynolds, followed, amplifying his cruelty with their own brand of teenage malice. Marcus kept his eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor, counting the steps to his next class. Just 20 more steps. 19, 18. The counting helped him focus on something other than the burning in his cheeks and the tightness in his chest. Seriously, dude, do you even fit through doorways? Trent's voice was closer now, just over Marcus's shoulder. Or do they have to grease you up like a stuck pig first? More laughter erupted, and Marcus felt something hit the back of his head, a crumpled paper ball. He didn't react. Experience had taught him that reactions only fueled their fire. Marcus pushed through the door of his history class, grateful for the momentary sanctuary. He squeezed into the reinforced desk that the school had specially ordered for him, another source of humiliation, and tried to make himself as small as possible, an impossible task for someone of his size. Ms. Hernandez, the history teacher, was one of the few staff members who seemed to see past Marcus's size. She greeted him with a warm smile as other students filed in, including, unfortunately, Devin Mitchell. "Hey, Marcus," Devin whispered as he passed. "Careful not to break that chair. The school budget can only handle one replacement per month." Marcus said nothing, opening his textbook and pretending to be absorbed in the chapter on the Civil War. He had perfected the art of appearing unbothered, while his insides churned with shame and anger. What none of these tormentors knew, what no one at Westridge High could possibly guess, was that Marcus Walker wasn't just a fat kid with no friends. He was something else entirely. Before his family moved to this small town, before the accident that led to his extreme weight gain, Marcus had been the national youth champion in Greco-Roman wrestling for 3 consecutive years. Beneath the layers of fat that now encased his body lay muscles that, while hidden, had never fully atrophied. His father, Michael Walker, was a former Olympic wrestler and now one of the most sought-after wrestling coaches in the country. The Walker name was legendary in wrestling circles, but here in this town they were nobodies, just a fat kid and his father who had moved in under mysterious circumstances. After the death of Marcus's mother in a car accident 2 years ago, both father and son had spiraled into grief. For Marcus, that grief manifested in compulsive eating and a complete withdrawal from the sport that had once defined him. His father had accepted a low-profile coaching position at the local community college, a far cry from his previous prestigious roles. To give them both space to heal, Marcus, would you care to share your thoughts on Lincoln's strategic approach during the early days of the Civil War? Ms. Hernandez's voice cut through his reverie. Marcus cleared his throat. Lincoln recognized that the Union's industrial superiority and population advantage would eventually overwhelm the Confederacy if he could maintain Northern morale through the early Confederate victories, he said quietly. His academic abilities were one thing that his weight hadn't affected. Ms. Hernandez smiled. Excellent analysis, Marcus. From the back of the classroom came a stage whisper, teacher's pet, probably hoping for extra credit cookies. The cafeteria was always the worst part of the day. Marcus had taken to sitting alone at a table in the far corner, his back to the wall so he could see anyone approaching. Today, he unwrapped a turkey sandwich that looked pitiful compared to the mountain of food most people assumed he consumed daily. The truth was, under his father's watchful eye, Marcus had been on a strict diet for months now. The weight wasn't coming off quickly, but it was coming off. Is that all you're eating? Trent slid onto the bench across from Marcus, his lunch tray loaded with pizza, fries, and a chocolate milk. Devin and Connor flanked him, their faces twisted in identical smirks, trying to slim down for bikini season. Marcus took a deliberate bite of his sandwich, chewing slowly and maintaining eye contact with Trent. This slight defiance was new, something he was trying out today. Trent's eyes narrowed at the lack of fear in Marcus's gaze. What's the matter? Fatso? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just too out of breath to talk? Trent reached across the table and poked Marcus's chest with a finger. Man, it's like jabbing the Michelin Man. How do you even get out of bed in the morning? I manage, Marcus said quietly, his first direct response to any of Trent's taunts since arriving at Westridge. Trent looked momentarily surprised before recovering his sneer. It speaks. Quick, someone call National Geographic. We've made first contact with Bigfoot. Keep calm, don't engage. They're not worth it. Marcus repeated his father's advice in his head like a mantra. You know what I wonder? Connor chimed in, leaning forward conspiratorially. How does he wipe his ass? Like seriously, the logistics must be a nightmare. The table erupted in laughter, drawing attention from nearby students who watched the spectacle with a mix of amusement and discomfort. Across the cafeteria, Marcus noticed a girl with short black hair frowning at the scene, Eliza Chen. They shared 2 classes, and she had once smiled at him when he held the door open for her. Leave him alone, guys. The unexpected voice came from Jasmine Rodriguez, a cheerleader who usually traveled in Trent's orbit. She had stopped by their table with her lunch tray. Don't you have anything better to do? Trent's face darkened. Mind your own business, Jazz. We're just having a friendly chat with our new classmate. Yeah, looks real friendly, Jasmine replied, rolling her eyes. She looked at Marcus with something akin to pity before walking away. Trent's embarrassment at being called out quickly morphed into renewed aggression. You're lucky you've got girls fighting your battles, fat boy, but they won't always be around. With that parting shot, Trent stood, deliberately knocking Marcus's sandwich to the floor before sauntering away with his entourage. Here, a soft voice said. Marcus opened his eyes to see Eliza standing before him, holding out half of her sandwich. It's peanut butter and jelly. Not very exciting, but it's better than nothing. Marcus blinked in surprise. Thanks. He accepted the offering, his massive hand dwarfing the small sandwich half. Eliza hovered awkwardly for a moment. Those guys are jerks. The whole school isn't like that, I promise. Without waiting for a response, she hurried back to her table, ducking her head as if embarrassed by her own kindness. The small act of compassion was like a drop of water in a desert, not enough to quench his thirst for acceptance, but enough to remind him that humanity existed even in this place. The rest of the day passed in a blur of classes and carefully navigated hallways. When the final bell rang, Marcus waited until the initial surge of students had cleared before making his way to his locker. He had developed an entire system to minimize his exposure to potential harassment, but today his timing was off. As he rounded the corner to the row of lockers where his was located, he saw Trent and his friends lounging nearby. They hadn't noticed him yet, giving Marcus a moment to consider retreating and coming back later. Before he could decide, Connor looked up and nudged Trent. Well, look who it is, Trent called out, pushing himself off the lockers. We were just talking about you, Marcus, my man. Marcus hesitated, then continued forward. His books were in his locker, and he needed them for homework. Just get your things and leave. Don't let them get to you. You know, we've got a little bet going, Trent continued as Marcus approached his locker. Connor thinks you can't touch your toes. Devin thinks you can't even see your toes. Trent's smile was all teeth and no warmth. I say we find out. Marcus opened his locker, keeping his back to the trio, focusing on the combination lock as if it required all his concentration. His hands were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Hey, Trent snapped, slamming Marcus's locker shut, nearly catching his fingers. I'm talking to you, lardass. Marcus turned slowly, looking down at Trent from his considerable height. Despite his weight, Marcus stood over 6 feet tall, towering over the quarterback. I need to get home, he said, his voice low and controlled. You need to show us if you can touch your toes first, Trent insisted, his voice taking on a harder edge. Come on, it'll take 2 seconds. Well, maybe longer for you, but you get the idea. A small crowd had begun to gather, sensing the potential for entertainment. Marcus felt the familiar weight of dozens of eyes on him, waiting for his humiliation. I'm not doing that, Marcus said firmly. Move. Trent's eyebrows shot up at the command. Oh, the whale's got an attitude now? He stepped closer, invading Marcus's space. Make me move. Something shifted in Marcus then, a subtle change in his posture, a tightening of his jaw. For the briefest moment, a glimpse of the athlete he once was flickered across his face. But, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by his usual mask of passive endurance. Please, Marcus said, hating the pleading note in his voice. I just want to go home. You heard him, Trent, a new voice interjected. Mr. Reeves, the PE teacher, approached with a stern expression. Don't you have football practice to get to? Trent's face fell into a practiced look of innocence. We were just talking, coach, no big deal. Uh-huh, Mr. Reeves said skeptically. Get going, all of you. He gestured to the gathering crowd, which began to disperse reluctantly, disappointed at being deprived of their afternoon show. Mr. Reeves waited until the hallway had mostly cleared before turning to Marcus. You okay, Walker? Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. You know, Mr. Reeves said, studying Marcus thoughtfully, I thought your name sounded familiar when I first saw it on my roster. Your dad is Michael Walker, isn't he? The wrestler. Marcus froze, his hand still on his locker door. Yeah, he admitted after a pause. That's my dad. I followed his career back in the day. Incredible athlete. Mr. Reeves looked at Marcus with new interest. Did you ever take up the sport? A long time ago, Marcus said vaguely, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. As to Tew, Reeves seemed to sense his discomfort and backed off. Well, if those guys give you any more trouble, let me know. And hey, the weight room is open after school most days if you're ever interested. The walk home was long but necessary. Doctors, orders for daily exercise. By the time Marcus reached the small house he shared with his father on the outskirts of town, his shirt was soaked with sweat, and his breath came in labored gasps. He found his father in the backyard, setting up what looked like training equipment, an old wrestling mat spread across the grass, a weights bench, and various resistance bands. Michael Walker looked up as Marcus approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile. Hey, champ, how was school? Fine, Marcus lied as he did every day. He gestured to the equipment. What's all this? His father straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. I think it's time, Marcus. We've been hiding long enough. Marcus felt a flutter of panic. Dad, I can't. Look at me. He gestured to his massive frame. Michael walked over to his son, placing his hands on Marcus's shoulders. At 6'4", the former Olympian was one of the few people who could make Marcus feel small. I see you, son. I've always seen you. The wrestler is still in there underneath it all. The mind knows what to do, even if the body's a little rusty. A little? Marcus scoffed. But there was less bite in it than there might have been a few months ago. We start small, Michael continued, as if he hadn't heard the interruption. Basic movements, rebuilding your foundation. No pressure, no competitions, just you reconnecting with who you are. He squeezed Marcus's shoulders. What do you say? Marcus looked at the familiar blue mat, feeling a pull he'd been denying for years. They'd laugh if they knew, he said quietly, thinking of Trent and his friends. Let them, his father replied simply. Their laughter won't matter when you find your strength again. That night, for the first time in 2 years, Marcus stepped onto a wrestling mat. His movements were slow and awkward at first, his body resisting the familiar stances. But as his father guided him through basic drills, muscle memory began to awaken. By the end of an hour, Marcus was drenched in sweat, his lungs burning, but something had changed in his eyes, a spark reignited. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. School remained a minefield of humiliation, with Trent and his crew finding new ways to torment Marcus daily. But each afternoon, Marcus would come home and train with his father, reconnecting with the discipline and techniques that had once been as natural as breathing. The weight wasn't melting off miraculously, but his body was changing subtly, muscle remembering its purpose beneath the layers of fat. In the cafeteria, Eliza had taken to occasionally sitting with Marcus during lunch, bringing along her friend Maya from the band. They didn't talk much at first, but their presence created a small buffer against Trent's more overt attacks. Why do you let them talk to you like that? Eliza asked one day, after Trent had walked by, making oinking noises. You're like twice his size, Marcus shrugged, picking at his salad. Fighting back only makes it worse. Does it, though? Maya chimed in. Because from where I'm sitting, it's already pretty bad. The truth was more complicated than he cared to explain. Yes, he could physically overpower Trent and probably his friends too, even in his current condition, but that wasn't who he wanted to be. The discipline of wrestling had taught him control, restraint, the understanding that strength came with responsibility. There are other ways to stand up for yourself, he said finally. Attention, Westridge High. Trent's voice suddenly boomed across the cafeteria as he stood on a chair. It's time to announce this year's nominations for the Fall Formal Court. The Fall Formal was a big deal at Westridge, second only to prom in importance. And for our comedic relief nomination, Trent continued with a malicious grin, I nominate Marcus Walker, the biggest presence in our school. Laughter rippled through the cafeteria, though not as universally as Trent might have hoped. Several students looked uncomfortable, including Jasmine, who was sitting at the popular table but staring at her plate. Come on up, Marcus, Trent called, gesturing grandly. Let's hear your acceptance speech. That is, if you can make it all the way up here without triggering a seismic event. Marcus sat frozen, feeling hundreds of eyes on him, waiting for his reaction. Beside him, Eliza was furious. That's it, she muttered, starting to stand. I'm going to— No, Marcus said quietly, putting a hand on her arm. It's okay. Slowly, deliberately, Marcus stood up. The cafeteria fell silent, everyone watching as he stepped away from the table. For a moment, it looked like he might actually be going to confront Trent, but instead Marcus turned and walked calmly toward the exit, his face impassive. That's right, run away, Trent shouted after him. Waddle away like the coward you are. The cafeteria doors swung shut behind Marcus, cutting off Trent's taunts. In the empty hallway, Marcus leaned against the wall, breathing hard, not from exertion, but from the effort of containing his rage. He closed his eyes, focusing on his father's training mantra: control what you can control. Your reaction is always your choice. After school, instead of heading straight home, Marcus found himself walking toward the gym. Mr. Reeves had mentioned the weight room being open, and suddenly Marcus felt an overwhelming need to burn off the toxic energy building inside him. Mr. Reeves was spotting a student on the bench press, but looked up when Marcus entered. Walker, he said, sounding pleased. Decided to take me up on that offer? 15 minutes later, Marcus found himself on a leg press machine, starting with weights that would have been his warm-up in the old days. Mr. Reeves kept his comments neutral and professional, offering guidance without judgment as Marcus worked through a basic circuit. You've got good form, Mr. Reeves noted as Marcus completed a set of lat pull-downs. You've done this before. Marcus wiped sweat from his brow. A long time ago. Mr. Reeves nodded thoughtfully. You know, the wrestling team is looking for a heavyweight. We haven't had a decent one in years. A short laugh escaped Marcus before he could stop it. I don't think so. Why not? Mr. Reeves leaned against the machine. You've got the foundation. I can see it in how you move. And heavyweights in high school wrestling go up to 285 pounds. You'd have some cutting to do, but I'm way beyond that, Marcus interrupted, shaking his head. I'm at least 650 pounds. Mr. Reeves raised an eyebrow. That's a lot, he acknowledged, but not impossible to work with if you're serious about getting back to the sport. I didn't say anything about getting back to it. You didn't have to. Mr. Reeves's gaze was knowing. The offer stands if you change your mind. The training sessions with his father intensified. Michael, seeing the renewed spark in his son, pushed harder, introducing more advanced techniques and increasing the cardiovascular components. Marcus's diet became stricter, more focused on fueling his workouts rather than simply cutting calories. At school, the bullying continued, but something had shifted in how Marcus carried himself. He still didn't engage, still walked away from confrontations, but there was a new steadiness in his gait, a subtle confidence that hadn't been there before. You seem different, Eliza said one day as they walked to class together. Good different. Marcus offered a half-smile, something else that was becoming more frequent. Just working through some stuff, he said vaguely. The day of reckoning came. 3 weeks later, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Marcus was at his locker swapping out books for his next class when a commotion down the hall caught his attention. Trent and his friends had cornered a freshman, a scrawny boy with glasses who looked terrified as the older boys loomed over him. Seriously, Evan, we're doing you a favor, Trent was saying, loud enough for his voice to carry. No one wants to. See your pathetic Star Wars t-shirts. We're improving the school aesthetic. Connor yanked at the boy's backpack while Devin held him against the lockers. Several students walked by, averting their eyes from the scene, unwilling to get involved. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, but this time it wasn't fear. It was resolve. He closed his locker and moved toward the group, his massive frame parting the crowd of onlookers effortlessly. Let him go, Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of authority that made heads turn. Trent looked up, momentarily startled, before his face settled into its usual sneer. Well, if it isn't the Mountain himself, what's it to— You lardass! I said let him go! Marcus stepped closer, towering over all of them. Trent released the freshman's shirt, but turned fully to face Marcus. Or what? You'll sit on me. He laughed, looking around for approval from his audience. This isn't your business, Walker. Walk away. If you can manage it without getting winded. Marcus held Trent's gaze, no longer looking away or down as he had for weeks. I'm making it my business. Something in Marcus's tone made Trent hesitate, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face before bravado reasserted itself. You know what? I'm tired of your attitude. You think just because you're a landmass you can tell me what to do? He shoved Marcus's chest hard with both hands, or at least he tried to. Marcus barely moved, solid as a brick wall despite the force of Trent's push. Years of wrestling had taught Marcus how to center his weight, how to ground himself against opposing force. Even with the extra pounds, those fundamentals remained ingrained. Trent's eyes widened slightly. He pushed again, harder this time, with similar lack of effect. "What the hell, I asked you to stop," Marcus said, his voice still calm. "I'm not looking for trouble." "Too bad because you found it," Trent snapped, embarrassment fueling his anger now. He drew back his fist and swung at Marcus's face. What happened next occurred so quickly that many onlookers would later recall it differently. Marcus sidestepped. The punch, with surprising agility, caught Trent's extended arm and used the quarterback's own momentum to redirect him into the lockers. It was a basic move, one of the first his father had taught him when he was 8 years old. Trent found himself face first against cold metal, his arm gently but firmly held behind his back by Marcus's massive hand. "Don't," Marcus said quietly, close to Trent's ear. "It won't end well for you." The hallway had gone completely silent. Connor and Devon stood frozen, clearly unprepared for this turn of events. The freshman scrambled away, taking advantage of the distraction. "Get off me, you freak!" Trent struggled against Marcus's hold, but he might as well have been pushing against a mountain. Marcus held him just firmly enough to control him without causing pain. "Are we done here?" Marcus asked, still maddeningly calm. "Mr. Walker, Mr. Holloway." The sharp voice of Principal Mercer cut through the tension. "What is going on here?" Marcus immediately released Trent, stepping back with his hands raised. Trent spun around, his face flushed with rage and humiliation. "He attacked me," he spluttered. "Did you see that? He slammed me into the lockers." Principal Mercer looked between the two boys, taking in the scene with practiced skepticism. "My office. Both of you now." In the principal's office, Trent wove a tale of unprovoked aggression, claiming Marcus had finally snapped and attacked him for no reason. Marcus sat quietly, letting the lies wash over him until Principal Mercer turned to him for his version. "He was bullying a freshman," Marcus said simply. "I asked him to stop. He pushed me twice, then tried to punch me. I defended myself without hurting him." Before Principal Mercer could respond, there was a knock at the door. Ms. Hernandez entered, followed by the freshman Evan, and surprisingly Jasmine Rodriguez. "Excuse me, Principal Mercer," Ms. Hernandez said. "These students have something they'd like to share regarding the incident." Both Evan and Jasmine provided accounts that corroborated Marcus's version of events. Jasmine, in particular, was unexpectedly forthcoming about Trent's history of bullying, mentioning that she had seen enough and decided it was time to speak up. Principal Mercer dismissed Evan and Jasmine, thanking them for their honesty, before turning back to the two boys. "Mr. Holloway, it seems you've been less than truthful. I'll be calling your parents to discuss your behavior and appropriate consequences. I'm also removing you from this weekend's game." "What? You can't do that," Trent protested. "Coach Reeves and I have already discussed the possibility," Principal Mercer interrupted. "He supports my decision fully. Now, wait outside while I speak with Mr. Walker." Once Trent had stormed out, Principal Mercer turned to Marcus with a softer expression. "Mr. Walker, while I commend your desire to help a fellow student, physical altercations are never the answer. However, given the circumstances and witness statements, I see this as self-defense. You're free to go with a warning to seek adult assistance in the future." Marcus nodded, relief washing over him. "Thank you, sir." As he stood to leave, Principal Mercer added, "And Marcus, perhaps it's time to stop hiding your light under a bushel, so to speak. Mr. Reeves mentioned you might have some interest in the wrestling team. I think that could be a positive channel for your talents." News of the hallway confrontation spread through Westridge High like wildfire. By the next morning, Marcus's status had undergone a seismic shift. Students who had previously ignored him now nodded greetings in the hallway. Underclassmen who had feared becoming Trent's next target looked at Marcus with something akin to hero worship. In the cafeteria, Marcus's usual corner table was suddenly occupied by not just Eliza and Maya, but a half-dozen other students curious about the quiet giant who had stood up to Trent Holloway. "So is it true you used to be a wrestler?" Ryan from his math class asked eagerly. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "My dad was an Olympic alternate. He coached me for a while." "That's sick," exclaimed another boy. "No wonder you handled Trent like it was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," Marcus corrected, uncomfortable with this aspect of his newfound fame. "Fighting shouldn't be the answer. I should have found another way." "But sometimes," Eliza said quietly beside him, "standing up is exactly what's needed." After school, Marcus found Mr. Reeves waiting by his locker. "Heard you had an eventful day yesterday," the coach said without preamble. Marcus sighed. Not my finest moment. I disagree, Mr. Reeves said. Standing up for someone who can't stand up for themselves, that's exactly what I look for in my athletes. He handed Marcus a piece of paper. Practice schedule for the wrestling team. We start next week. Weight room sessions until then. That night, Marcus showed the practice schedule to his father. Michael studied it in silence for a long moment before looking up with suspiciously bright eyes. If this is what you want, son, I'm behind you 100%. I don't know if I can do it, Marcus admitted, voicing his deepest fear. Get back to where I was. Be that person again. You won't be that person again, his father said, echoing his words from weeks ago. You'll be someone new. Someone who fell and got back up. That's worth more than any championship. The following Monday, Marcus Walker walked into the Westridge High wrestling room for the first time. Conversation stopped as the team turned to stare at the massive newcomer. Coach Reeves stepped forward with a smile. Everyone, this is Marcus Walker. He's joining us as a heavyweight prospect. He turned to Marcus. Welcome to the team. As Marcus stepped onto the mat, feeling the familiar give beneath his feet, he knew the road ahead would be long and difficult. The weight wouldn't come off overnight. The skills would take time to fully return. There would be setbacks and challenges and days when it all seemed impossible. But for the first time in 2 years, Marcus felt like himself again. Not the old self he had lost, but a new self emerging from the crucible of grief and pain and perseverance. A self who understood that true strength wasn't about physical power, but about the courage to stand up, to face your demons, and to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. 3 months later, a much-changed Marcus stood in the center of the wrestling mat at the regional championships. He'd lost over 60 pounds through relentless training and strict diet. While still far above the heavyweight limit, he was competing in an exhibition match arranged by Coach Reeves, his first public return to the sport that had once been his life. Across from him stood a heavyweight from a rival school, eyeing Marcus's still substantial frame with poorly disguised skepticism. In the stands, Marcus could see his father watching intently, alongside Eliza, Maya, and a surprising number of students from Westridge who had come to support him, and at the back of the gym, partially hidden behind the bleachers, stood Trent Holloway. Since their confrontation, Trent had given Marcus a wide berth, his bullying tactics largely abandoned after the public exposure of his behavior. He wasn't there to support Marcus, probably more curiosity than anything, but his presence felt like the closing of a circle. As the referee blew his whistle to start the match, Marcus settled into his stance, feeling the familiar rhythm of the sport returning to him like an old friend. He might never be the champion he once was, might never reach the heights his younger self had taken for granted, but he had found something more valuable: his strength, his voice, his willingness to stand tall. And as he moved forward to engage, his opponent, Marcus Walker, was at last comfortable in his own skin, all 589 pounds of it. Now, what's your opinion about this story? Leave a comment, as we'd love to read it. Also, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription means a lot to me and helps me a great deal, so please subscribe, so we can keep bringing you content like this. And it's not over yet. Another emotional story like this one is playing on your screen right now. Click on it. I'm waiting for you.